What is up, everybody? Welcome to another weekend roundup here on Touchline Talk. Before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I am putting out every single week. Of course, your headliner of the weekend, Arsenal, Manchester United, a rematch of Arsenal's only loss in the Premier League this season. And Arsenal are ultimately able to avenge that loss with a really entertaining, dramatic late victory. And I'm I'm not going to get too deep into this game. The simple explanation is Arsenal are the better team. Arsenal were the better team in this game. They deserve to win. Manchester United offered very little going forward outside of, a counterattack here, a moment of brilliance there, a weird header off of a corner there. But the one thing that United still is trying to evolve under Eric Ten Hag is the being dynamic with the ball, being able to be in control with the ball, and you saw very little of that in this game. They always posed a threat because Manchester United always posed a threat on the counterattack, especially when Marcus Rashford is in this kind of form. But large portions of this game, from the very beginning to the very end, Arsenal were absolutely dominant and were decidedly the better team. But the thing I really want to focus on here is this game just laid out very clearly all of the reasons why I am such a believer in this Arsenal team. First, and this just kind of, coming from the opening kickoff again, they just don't have bad performances. Some are certainly better than others. This was a very good one. But even on the days where things don't go well, they are not great, but it's fine. And you compare that to, what you've seen from Manchester United at times, not recently, but earlier in this season. What Manchester City were going through, where they had one shot on target across, I think it was two entire games, and then we're down 2-0 at Spurs, 2-0 to Spurs at halftime of the next game. The stretches Liverpool have had. You can pick any team, basically, and say, here's where they've been really poor over this extended period of time. Except for Arsenal. And usually, decent to good is enough to get 3 points against your average Premier League team because they're just playing so well and they're so talented at this point. And then in the big games, they really do show up. And it is absolutely incredible what they're doing. That's first. The second thing, and this is what I continue to come back to and will shout from the rooftops until they win this title and after it if they do. The way they responded to conceding the opener, I'll start with that first. I don't know if you noticed, but the immediate reaction of multiple players, I think Odegaard was one of them, I think Gabriel might have been one of them, I don't remember exactly who it was. There were no heads dropping. I know that's kind of a cliche thing, and I'm not a huge fan of it either, but from a body language standpoint, it was all positive. The thing that stood out to me, though, was multiple players trying to get the crowd excited, actually physically motioning to the crowd to make noise. That is a team A that is confident, and that is a team B that is unfazed by adversity and just knows how to deal with this stuff. Half of this battle, when you're trying to take down a Manchester City, is actually believing you can do it and showing up every single game, even if you're down a goal, believing you can come back and win. This is not the first time they've had to sort of turn a game around like this. But they were completely unfazed. And you compare that to even, what was it? 6, 7 months ago at this point? 8 months? At the end of last season? And all of last season, right, those stretches where they lost 2-3 games in a row and everything kept snowballing? This is not, the mental toughness, the resilience part is not something you associate with Arsenal in the recent past. But I have complete faith in this team's mental fortitude. 100%. You can say what you want about Mikel Arteta's behavior on the sideline. It is not impacting his players. You don't see teams very often respond that way. It just did not bother them one bit. And they come right back. Eddie Nketiah steps up, gets an equalizer. It's game on. Bukayo Saka does Bukayo Saka magic to make it 2-1. And then you concede a bizarre equalizer where your goalkeeper needs to do better. Now, there haven't been very many occasions to criticize Aaron Ramsdale this season. That was one, though, and it ends up in the back of the net. One of the stranger header goals off a corner you're ever going to see. Again, just things happen. We move forward. And it's Nketiah, outstanding finish that probably won't get the credit it deserves at the in stoppage time, late on to win that game. And Arsenal walk away with all 3 points. Not only does that keep their lead, but if you haven't noticed or aren't really paying attention to the points and you're focused more on the gap between Arsenal and Manchester City, Arsenal are on pace to tie that Manchester City team that finished with 100 points for the best season in the history of the Premier League at the halfway point. Now, still got 19 games to go. But just think about that sentence. Halfway through the season, they are on pace to be tied for the best team in the history of the Premier League era. I have nothing to point to say I am worried, other than the possibility that Manchester City just wins 19 consecutive or 20, 18, whatever it is. Basically just doesn't drop points the rest of the season. But even that's going to require going into the Emirates and winning. And I just don't see that happening. My expectations are just this high for Arsenal. I expected this kind of performance, and they delivered once again. I walked into the North London Derby expecting the kind of performance they got. And it's not going to happen every week. Things don't always go perfectly. They're still finding ways to win those games too. Their consistency is remarkable, and the mental side of this is really what why I bought into them so early on. It took me a while to get there. It wasn't like week 3 or 4 I was on board with this thing. But once it became clear as you got past, the first North London Derby and they kept winning, talking, 10, 15 games in, kind of as we're leading up to the World Cup break, you could just tell this was different. And that this team, a bunch of guys who don't have experience doing this and are still learning about the process of winning, because learning to win is a process, have skipped a bunch of levels in that process and have absolutely figured out how to behave like a team that intends to win a Premier League title. Now, they did this for, extended portions of last season, then it did all fall apart at the end. I don't see that happening. This title race isn't over. There are way too many games left. Manchester City's got way too much talent to just say this is over. But there were 3 games against Manchester clubs left, and now there are 2, and Arsenal's lead is the same. I really do think part of the equation for City at this point is going and at least taking 4 points from those 2 games when they face Arsenal head-to-head. I just don't see it happening. So that's really what I wanted to focus this is that game was everything that makes me believe in this Arsenal team. They put it on display again in one of the biggest games of the season. How do you come back against another really good opponent after you beat Spurs? That's how. There is nothing left to say. It's just a question of whether they can seal this. They are the best team in the world. They are the best team in the Premier League. This title is theirs to lose. End of story. The other thing I want to mention before I get out of here is what happened to Juventus. Friday, the news breaks. They're getting hit with, among other things, a 15-point deduction. People involved in this whole, whatever you want to call it, mess are, facing suspensions, Andrea Agnelli, etc. I want to stick more on the on-field and kind of what this means for Juventus moving forward side of it. Obviously, there are ramifications for Tottenham as well, for example. But the first thing that I can't go without mentioning is it's just amusing the audacity of somebody like Andrea Agnelli. Well, this kind of stuff is going on to continue pushing the Super League and just behaving like this club and the other elite clubs in Europe are just above everybody else and don't need anybody else. And then this kind of stuff happens. It's a, and Barcelona's got all of their financial issues. It, it just it blows my mind that people behave that way, but here we are. So there are kind of 2 points I want to hit on here. First, now with this weekend's results, Juventus are 11 and the deduction. Juventus are 11 points back of a European spot, not a Champions League spot, a European spot, with having played an extra game. This is going to take an awful lot of work to even get back into European competition next season. Forget about the Champions League for a second, just European competition in general. That is a huge deal. It's the same issue, a similar issue to the one Everton are facing, who lost again, by the way. This idea that the club is not built from a financial model of transfer strategy standpoint to withstand not being in the Champions League, or in Everton's case, being in the Championship. And so you're going to see, assuming they don't pull this off and find a way to still qualify for the Champions League, and also assuming, right, there's still appeals pending, and assuming that this is the end result, is just this punishment. Unless they find a way to get back into the Champions League, this is going to impact the next, the summer transfer window, whether players want to go to Juventus. They very well may be back in a position, because they have been playing quite well over the past few months, outside of that Napoli debacle. They could very well be in position to make a run at a Serie A title next season. But in terms of maintaining and kind of building off of this improvement this season, this is a massive blow. Because you're going to kind of have to start, maybe you have to sell some players. You can't bring in who you want, so you're not as deep as you would like. This financial stuff matters. And there is certainly no guarantee Juventus are playing in European competition. Not even forget about the Champions League, like I said. Conference League, Europa League, no guarantee whatsoever. They have an incredible, because this is with Atalanta's kind of emergence in the past handful of seasons. It's 7 teams fighting for 6 spots pretty much every season. Because nobody is ever awful, where they sort of take themselves out of the equation. So maybe you have, Inter, AC Milan might have been the 2 battling for the titles this season. It's Napoli in danger of running away with the league. But your Roma's always there. Your Lazio's always there. Atalanta took a big step back last season, but they're much better this season. So you're right back to those 7 teams fighting for those 6 spots. This changes the complexion of all of that if Juventus aren't part of that conversation. And then from a Serie A standpoint, this is really where I wanted to get to. I've talked about this before. I don't know if I've mentioned it on video too much. But the next step for this league, in terms of kind of the European hierarchy, is to make some inroads in the Champions League. Juventus, outside of that one run Roma have, Juventus have been the only team to do anything of note in the Champions League recently. You had, the Inter flame out, and it got a little bit better this season. And of course, we're only at the round of 16, so this could change. Napoli certainly have the ability to win this thing. Maybe it's a different conversation by the summer. But it's not enough just to have an AC Milan and Inter Milan who are capable of winning the Serie A title. Those teams have not translated into meaningful European success. For this league to get back to where it hopes to be on the European stage, you need all 3 clubs, both Milan clubs and Juventus, firing on all cylinders. And then you're hoping something like this Napoli season happens. Or Atalanta has a fantastic season. Roma has, you throw in Roma winning a Europa Conference League in addition to 2 quarterfinalists and a semifinalist in the Champions League or something like that. You need all of it working together. And for the longest time, it was just Juventus, and Juventus, making Champions League finals, certainly one of the top 5 in some seasons, even better than that teams in the world. They were carrying the rest of Serie A while the Milan teams regrouped. Then the Milan teams reemerge, and there's Juventus hanging around, 4th place and just not being a factor for a couple seasons. They're starting to get back to and they had a disastrous Champions League this season, but they're starting to get back to the point where they look like Juventus again. And now this happens. It just, for whatever reason, over the past decade or so, Serie A have just not been able to get all the pieces going together to really change the way this league is viewed. I love this league because of the parity. Which, not so much this season, but generally, it's very interesting in that sense. It's not just, can somebody beat Bayern, can somebody beat PSG, can somebody hang with Barcelona and Real Madrid? It's, who knows what happens with can a Milan team win? Can a team repeat? Since this Juventus stranglehold has been broken over the past couple of seasons. But the next step is you got to make some noise in Europe. You got to be able to hang with the Bayerns of the world, the PSGs of the world, the Barcelonas, the Real Madrids. I know Barcelona are out of the Champions League this season, but you get the point. In addition to all the Premier League clubs who are going to be there. And that's where Serie A has really struggled. And Juventus was the one team that was able to hold their own. And then it kind of fell off a cliff. The Pirlo thing was a disaster. Now Max Allegri's back. It started to work a little bit better. You still got Inter's financial issues as well. And this is just another roadblock for Serie A as well, because Serie A is at its best when Juventus is right there, kind of representing Italian soccer to the larger European landscape when it comes to Champions League and things like that. And then you hope you have the Milan clubs or somebody else there to challenge them for a title. And this is, like I said, this is going to have serious ramifications unless Juventus can find a way out of it and to overcome this 15-point deficit that has been handed to them. So that's why I wanted to leave this, is not just the implications for Juventus, but what Juventus means and the overall kind of impact on Serie A and where Serie A stands in comparison to the rest of Europe and where this league needs to go to take that next step. This is another issue that needs to be solved before you can finally get to a point where we're looking at Serie A teams as legitimate Champions League contenders. Napoli have put themselves in the conversation this season. But outside of that, you know, these last couple of seasons, you haven't really looked at it that way. Because the Milan teams have been disappointing, and Juventus haven't been there. And barring a miracle, Juventus aren't going to be there next season either. So that was the other thing I wanted to talk about coming out of this weekend. That is all for this weekend roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.